The first time my son called me just a housewife, he did not even look at me. He said it casually, like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. And for a moment, I believed him. I am 68 years old. I have lived in the same house for over 30 years, long enough to know exactly how the sunlight moves across the kitchen floor in the morning, long enough to recognize the sound of every cabinet door, every step on the stairs, every small shift in the air when someone walks in. This house has been my world, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I chose it. Every single day, I raised my son here. Daniel. He was 6 years old when his father left. I still remember the way he stood by the door that night, holding onto the edge of my sweater, asking questions I did not have the heart to answer. Is Dad coming back? I told him yes, because sometimes hope is kinder than truth. From that day on, it was just the two of us. No backup plan, no safety net, just a quiet promise I made to myself. He would never feel like he had less than anyone else. I worked when I could. Small jobs, flexible hours, anything that allowed me to still be there when he came home from school. But most of my life, I was here, cooking, cleaning, making sure everything ran smoothly. Not because I had to, but because I believed it mattered. I believed that building a home was just as important as building a career. Maybe I was wrong. Or maybe the world just stopped seeing it that way. Mom, can you make coffee? Daniel's voice pulled me back to the present. He stood in the doorway, already dressed for work, his tie slightly loose, his phone pressed between his shoulder and ear. Yes, I said, standing up from the table. I moved slowly, not because I was weak, but because my body had learned to take its time. The years had settled into my bones, not painfully, just firmly. As I poured the coffee, I listened to his conversation. Yes, I will be there by 9, he said. No, do not worry about that. I will handle it. He always handled things. That was who he had become. Efficient, capable, respected. Everything I had hoped for. I placed the cup in front of him. Here you go. Thanks, he said quickly, barely glancing up. Not unkind, just distracted. That had become our rhythm. Short exchanges, minimal words. Enough to function, but not enough to connect. He took a sip, then checked his watch. I have a meeting this morning, he said. I might be late tonight. I understand, I replied. And I did. I had spent years understanding, adjusting, making space. That was what I had always done best. Later that afternoon, Daniel told me he needed me to come with him somewhere. It is just a quick stop at the hospital, he said. I have to meet someone. I nodded. Of course. He did not explain further. He did not need to. I had learned not to ask too many questions. Not because I was afraid, but because I did not want to be inconvenient. We drove in silence. The city moved around us, busy and loud, people rushing from one place to another. Daniel kept his focus on the road, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping lightly against his phone. I watched the buildings pass by. For a moment, I wondered what it would have been like if I had chosen a different path, a different life. But the thought passed quickly, because regret had never been something I allowed myself to carry. Not when I had a child depending on me. When we arrived at the hospital, everything felt fast. People moving quickly, voices echoing through the hallways. Daniel walked ahead, confident, purposeful. I followed behind, steady but slower. Not because I could not keep up, but because I had learned. I was not expected to. We entered a conference room where a few people were already waiting. Doctors, staff, well-dressed professionals. Daniel greeted them easily, stepping into the conversation as if he had always belonged there. I stood near the door, quiet, observing, invisible. At first, no one noticed me. That was not unusual. I had spent years becoming someone who did not interrupt, did not demand attention, did not take up space unless necessary. And then someone asked, Daniel, is she with you? It was a simple question, neutral, but it shifted the room. Daniel glanced in my direction, just for a second, and then he said it. She is just my mother. Hey, housewife. Just. The word landed softly, but it stayed. Housewife. A label. A summary. A conclusion. I felt something inside me pause. Not break. Not collapse. Just stop. For a moment, I did not move. I did not speak. I simply stood there, letting the words settle into place. Because I had heard them before. In different ways. At different times. But never this clearly. Never this openly. She can wait outside, Daniel added, already turning back to the conversation. And just like that, I was no longer part of the room. I nodded slightly, even though no one was looking. Then I turned and stepped back into the hallway. The door closed behind me with a soft click. And for a moment, everything was quiet again. I stood there, alone, staring down the long corridor. People passed by. Doctors, nurses, patients, everyone moving with purpose, everyone going somewhere. And me, standing still, not because I had nowhere to go, but because I had just realized something. For years, I had built a life around being present for someone else, around making sure everything worked, everything functioned, everything held together. And somewhere along the way, that had become invisible, reduced, simplified, to a single word. Just. I let out a slow breath. Then I straightened slightly, not out of pride, not out of defiance, but out of something quieter, something I had not felt in a long time. Awareness. Because in that moment, standing alone in that hallway, I understood something clearly. This was not about what I had done, or what I had given. This was about what he could see, and more importantly, what he could not. I stood in that hallway longer than I should have, not because I did not know where to go, but because something inside me needed a moment to catch up. The door behind me remained closed, separating me from the room where my son was speaking, where decisions were being made, where conversations continued as if I had never been there, as if I had never mattered. I could still hear faint voices through the door, not clearly, just enough to know that life inside that room had moved on. Without me, I took a slow breath and looked around. The hallway was wide and bright, lined with chairs against the wall. A few people sat quietly, waiting. Some stared at their phones. Others looked down at their hands, lost in their own thoughts. No one paid attention to me. That was not unusual. I had spent years becoming someone people did not notice. Not invisible, just easy to overlook. I walked slowly toward one of the empty chairs and sat down. Carefully, deliberately. My hands rested in my lap, fingers loosely intertwined. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel it. The word, just. It echoed in my mind, not loudly, but steadily. She is just my mother. A housewife. I repeated it silently, not to hurt myself, but to understand it. Because sometimes, the truth is not in what people say. It is in how they say it. There had been no hesitation in his voice, no discomfort, no awareness of impact, which meant to him, it was not cruel. It was simply accurate. That realization stayed with me, not as anger, but as something deeper, a quiet question forming beneath everything else. When did I become something so small in his eyes? I shifted slightly in the chair, adjusting my posture. Across the hallway, a nurse walked past, pushing a cart filled with supplies. Her movements were quick, practiced, focused. Everyone here had a role, a purpose, something that defined them in this space. Doctor, nurse, administrator, patient, clear, recognized, valued. And me? I glanced down at my hands again. Housewife. The word felt different now, not because it was wrong, but because it had been reduced, simplified, stripped of everything it had once meant. I thought about the years, the meals, the routines, the sacrifices that had never been written down or measured. No title, no recognition, just done, because it needed to be, because someone had to do it, because I chose to. I leaned back slightly, letting my shoulders rest against the chair. A part of me wanted to dismiss it, to tell myself that Daniel had not meant anything by it, that he was busy, that he was under pressure, that it was just a moment. But another part of me, the part that had been quietly observing everything for years, knew better. This was not one moment. This was a pattern, a way of seeing me that had formed over time, gradually, silently, until it felt normal, until it no longer needed to be questioned. I closed my eyes briefly, not to escape, but to steady my thoughts, because reacting in that moment would not change anything. And I was not interested in reacting. Not anymore. After a few minutes, the door opened. Daniel stepped out, already mid-conversation on his phone. Yes, we can move forward with that, he said. I will handle the details. He walked past me without stopping, without looking in my direction, then paused a few steps ahead, as if remembering something. He turned slightly. Oh, Mom. You can come back in now, he said quickly. Not unkind. Just afterthought. I nodded once and stood up. Slowly. Steady. I walked toward the door and stepped inside. The room looked the same. The same people. The same arrangement. But I saw it differently now. Not as a place I did not belong, but as a place where I had been dismissed. There is a difference. I took a seat near the edge of the table. No one introduced me. No one asked anything. The conversation resumed almost immediately. Numbers, plans, logistics. Daniel spoke confidently, his voice steady, his presence strong. He belonged here. That was clear, and I was proud of that. I always had been. But pride did not erase what I had just experienced. It simply existed alongside it. After a while, the meeting ended. People stood, gathered their things, exchanged brief comments. A few nodded politely in my direction. Nothing more. As we walked out of the room, Daniel checked his phone again. "We are done here," he said. That did not take long. "No," I replied. We walked down the hallway together. For a moment, I thought about saying something. About asking him why he had said what he did. About telling him how it sounded. How it felt. But the words did not come. Not because I did not have them, but because I knew this was not the moment. Because something inside me had shifted, and I was not ready to speak from emotion. I wanted to understand first. To see clearly. To know exactly what I was responding to. We reached the exit and stepped outside. The air was cooler than I expected. Fresh. Grounding. Daniel unlocked the car. "I have another meeting later," he said. "So we should head back." I nodded. "All right." We got in. The engine started. The city moved around us again. Busy. Unchanged. But as I looked out the window, I noticed something. Not about the world. About myself. The feeling I had when I first stepped into that hallway had not disappeared, but it had changed. It was no longer confusion. No longer quiet hurt. It had become something else. Something steadier. More focused. Because for the first time, I was not just feeling what had happened. I was paying attention to it. And that made all the difference. I turned slightly, glancing at Daniel. He was focused on the road, confident, in control. Exactly as I had raised him to be. And suddenly, I understood something clearly. He had not meant to diminish me. He had simply forgotten what I was. Forgotten what I had been. Forgotten what I had given. And once something is forgotten long enough, it begins to feel like it never existed at all. I looked forward again. Calm. Steady. Because now, this was no longer about what he said. It was about what came next. The drive home was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that settles when there is nothing left to say, or when saying something would only make things heavier. Daniel kept his focus on the road, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near his phone. Every so often, the screen lit up, and his attention shifted for a second before returning forward. He did not ask if I was all right. He did not mention what happened in that room. And I did not expect him to. Because if something feels normal to someone, they do not think to question it. I looked out the window as the city passed by. Buildings. Traffic. People moving quickly, each with somewhere to be. For a long time, I had lived my life in a smaller world. A quieter one. One that did not require rushing or constant movement. A home. A routine. A presence that stayed, even when everything else changed. But sitting there, watching everything move forward, I began to realize something. I had not been standing still. I had simply been moving in a direction no one else thought to notice. When we arrived home, Daniel parked the car and stepped out immediately. "I have a call in 10 minutes, he said as we walked toward the front door. "I will be in my office." "All right," I replied. He nodded and disappeared down the hallway without another word. The house fell quiet again. Familiar. Still. I stood in the entryway for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. Then I moved slowly toward the living room and sat in the chair by the window. The same chair I had sat in countless times before. But today it felt different. Because today, I was not just sitting. I was thinking. Clearly. Carefully. Without rushing to explain anything away. I rested my hands in my lap and let my mind drift. Not to what had just happened, but to everything that came before it. Because if there was one thing I understood now, it was that moments like that do not appear out of nowhere. They are built. Quietly. Over time. I closed my eyes briefly, and memories began to surface. Not all at once. Just pieces. Small, steady fragments of a life I had lived without keeping track. Daniel at 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with his homework spread out in front of him. "Mom, I do not understand this," he had said, pointing at a page filled with numbers. I pulled up a chair beside him and leaned in, reading the problem carefully. "You will," I told him. "Let us go through it together." We stayed there for over an hour, line by line, step by step, until his face changed, from frustration to understanding. "You see," I said with a small smile. "You just needed time." He grinned back at me. "You always know how to fix things." I opened my eyes. The memory faded slowly. replaced by the quiet of the present. I let out a slow breath. Back then, I had been more than a presence. I had been support, guidance, stability, not something to be described in a single word, not something to be summarized. I stood up and walked toward the bookshelf near the corner of the room. My steps were steady, not rushed. I reached for one of the photo albums and opened it carefully. Page after page. Moments frozen in time. Birthdays, school events, graduations, each one telling a story that did not need explanation. I stopped on one photo. Daniel, around 12 years old, standing beside a small science project. His arm wrapped around me, pulling me closer. "Stay here," he had said to the person taking the picture. "I want my mom in it." I traced the edge of the photo lightly with my finger. Back then, he wanted me to be seen. I closed the album and placed it back on the shelf. Not with sadness, but with understanding. Because people do not always forget out of cruelty. Sometimes, they just move forward. And in that movement, they stop looking back. I returned to the chair and sat down again. This time, my posture was different. More upright. More present. Because something inside me had shifted again. Not from hurt, but from clarity. The word he used earlier. Housewife. It was not wrong, but it was incomplete. And that was the part that mattered. Because I had never been just anything. No one is. We are made up of years. Choices. Sacrifices. Moments that do not always leave visible marks, but shape everything that comes after. I leaned back slightly, looking toward the hallway where Daniel had disappeared. I could hear his voice faintly now, speaking through the closed door of his office. Confident. Focused. Exactly as he had been in that conference room. And for a moment, I felt something unexpected. Not resentment. Not disappointment. But distance. A clear, undeniable distance between who he thought I was and who I had actually been. I rested my hands on the armrests of the chair. Steady. Grounded. Because this was not about correcting him. Not yet. This was about understanding the gap. The space between perception and truth. And deciding what to do with it. I stood up again, slowly, and walked toward the window. The afternoon light stretched across the floor, warm and quiet. I watched as a car passed by outside. Then another. Life continuing. Uninterrupted. And in that moment, I realized something important. If I wanted to be seen differently, I could not rely on memory, or expectation, or hope. I would have to show it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. Because the truth about who we are does not disappear. It just waits until someone is willing to see it again. The next morning, Daniel asked me to come with him again. It was not a question. It was not even a request. More like a decision he had already made. "I need to stop by the hospital again," he said as he adjusted his jacket. "It will not take long." I looked up from the table. "Do you need me there?" I asked. The question came out calmly. Not defensive, not uncertain, just clear. He paused for a moment, as if considering the answer. "Not really," he said. "But it is easier if you come." Easier. The words settled quietly between us. I nodded. All right. Because I understood what he meant. It was not about my presence. It was about convenience. Something that fit into his schedule. Something that did not require extra effort. And for a long time, that had been enough for me. But today, I noticed it. Clearly. I stood up and prepared to leave, moving at my usual steady pace. As I reached for my coat, I caught my reflection briefly in the mirror by the door. I looked the same. The same posture. The same quiet expression. The same woman I had been for years. But something inside me had shifted. Not visible, but present. And I could feel it. The drive to the hospital was shorter this time. Or maybe it just felt that way. Daniel spoke briefly about his schedule, about a meeting he needed to attend later, about a few details that did not require my response. I listened, nodded when appropriate. But my attention was elsewhere. Not outside the window, not on the passing streets, but inward, observing, understanding. Because I knew something now. I was not just accompanying him. I was watching, learning, seeing things I had not allowed myself to see before. When we arrived, the hospital looked the same as the day before. Bright, organized, efficient, people moving with purpose. Daniel walked ahead again, his pace confident, his path clear. I followed behind, not rushing, not trying to keep up, because I no longer felt the need to match his pace. I only needed to follow my own. We reached a different floor this time. A quieter one, less crowded, more focused. Daniel stopped near a reception desk and spoke briefly with a staff member. "Yes, we are here for the meeting," he said. "Room 214. The staff member nodded and pointed down the hallway. Second door on the left. Thank you, he replied. He turned to me. You can sit here if you want, he said, gesturing toward a row of chairs. I will not be long. There it was again. The option to stay outside. The expectation to remain separate. I looked at the chairs, then back at him. I will walk with you, I said. He hesitated for a brief second. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough for me. Then he nodded. All right. We walked together down the hallway. The floor was polished, reflecting the overhead lights in soft lines that stretched beneath our feet. When we reached the door, he opened it and stepped inside. I followed. The room was smaller than the one before, more focused. A few people were already seated at the table. 2 doctors, 1 nurse, a man with a folder open in front of him. They looked up as we entered. Daniel greeted them immediately, his tone professional, confident. Thank you for meeting with me again, he said. They nodded, returning the greeting. Then one of them glanced in my direction. A brief look. Curious, but not questioning. Daniel did not introduce me this time. He simply continued speaking, moving into the conversation as if everything was already understood. I took a seat quietly near the end of the table. Not hidden, but not central. The discussion began almost immediately. Details, numbers, timelines. The kind of conversation that moves quickly, with purpose, where every word serves a function. I listened, carefully, not because I needed to understand everything, but because I wanted to understand something. The way people spoke, the way they looked at each other, the way they responded. Because sometimes, meaning is not in the words. It is in everything around them. Daniel leaned forward slightly, explaining a situation, outlining a plan, answering questions with ease. He belonged here. That much was clear. He had built a place for himself in this world. A role, a presence, and I had helped him get there. That thought did not bring regret, only clarity, because what he had built had come from somewhere. The conversation continued for several minutes. Then, as one of the doctors shifted in his seat, something changed. It was subtle, a small pause, a slight turn of the head. His eyes moved toward me, not quickly, not casually, but with focus. I felt it before I fully noticed it. The difference, because this was not the kind of glance I had received before. This was not polite acknowledgement or passing curiosity. This was attention. He looked at me again, longer this time, as if trying to confirm something, as if something in his mind was not aligning with what he expected. I sat still, calm, unmoved, but aware, because for the first time since entering that room, I was not invisible, and that was different. He leaned back slightly, his eyes still on me. The conversation around him continued, but his focus had shifted. Not completely, but enough. I could see it. The recognition forming. Slow, uncertain, but real. And in that moment, I understood something. Whatever came next was not going to be what Daniel expected. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The way he looked at me, focused, still, different from everyone else in the room. The conversation continued around us, voices steady, professional, moving from one topic to the next. Daniel was speaking again, explaining something about timelines, about coordination, about next steps. But the doctor, he was not listening anymore. Not fully. His attention kept returning to me, not in a way that felt intrusive, but in a way that felt deliberate, as if he was searching for something, trying to place a memory, or confirm a thought he was not yet ready to say out loud. I remained still in my seat, my hands resting quietly in my lap. I had spent years being unnoticed, ignored, passed over without a second thought. So I knew the difference when someone was truly looking. And this was not casual. The doctor leaned slightly forward, his eyes narrowing just enough to show concentration. Then he glanced down at the papers in front of him, back up at me, then down again. A pattern, subtle, but clear. Something was not matching. Daniel continued speaking, confident, focused, unaware. He had not noticed the shift. Not yet. And no one interrupted him. Not at first. Because moments like this, they do not arrive loudly. They build, quietly, until they can no longer be ignored. I watched the doctor carefully now, not reacting, not anticipating, just observing. Because whatever he was seeing, he was getting closer to it. And then it happened. He set his pen down, slowly, not abruptly, but with intention. And when he spoke, his voice was calm, but no longer part of the original conversation. I am sorry, he said, turning slightly toward me. The room paused. Not completely, But enough. Daniel stopped mid-sentence, his words trailing off. The others at the table shifted their attention. Confusion. Curiosity. What is it? Daniel asked. But the doctor did not respond to him immediately. His eyes remained on me, studying, careful, as if making sure, as if giving himself one last moment to be certain before saying something that could not be taken back. I felt the shift in the room, the attention, the quiet, but I did not move, because something inside me had already understood. This moment was not about interruption. It was about recognition. Have we met before? The doctor asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight, because it was not casual. It was precise, intentional. I looked at him, really looked this time. His face was older than I remembered, more defined, lines around his eyes that spoke of years of experience, of long hours, of decisions that mattered. But something about him felt familiar, not immediately, not clearly, but enough. I am not sure, I replied calmly, my voice steady, because I did not want to guess, and I did not want to assume. He nodded slightly, as if he had expected that answer. Then he leaned back, exhaling slowly. But he did not let it go. Instead, he tried again. What is your name? He asked. That question changed the room. Not dramatically, but noticeably, because now, this was no longer a passing thought. This was a shift in focus. Daniel turned toward me, a slight frown forming. Her name is Margaret Carter, he said quickly. She is just. He stopped himself. Too late. The word had almost come again. Just. But this time, it did not land, because the moment had already moved beyond it. The doctor's expression changed, not in shock, not in disbelief, but in something quieter, something deeper. Recognition. Clear. Unmistakable. He leaned forward again. This time, there was no hesitation. Margaret Carter, he repeated. Slowly, carefully, as if confirming it with himself. Then he looked directly at me, and asked the question that shifted everything. Is that really you? The room fell silent. Not partially, completely, because now, everyone understood. Something important had just happened. Daniel looked between us, confusion evident on his face. What is going on? He asked. But no one answered him. Not yet, because this moment did not belong to him. It belonged to something else, something that had been buried, forgotten, reduced, and was now returning. I held the doctor's gaze, calm, steady, because I understood something now. This was not about proving anything. This was not about correcting anyone. This was simply truth, waiting to be seen again. Yes, I said. My voice was quiet, but clear. It is me. And in that moment, everything began to change. For a moment, no one moved. The air in the room felt different. Still, heavy, as if everything had paused, waiting for the next word. The doctor did not look away from me, not even for a second. And now, I could see it clearly. He was no longer searching. He had found what he was looking for. I knew it, he said quietly. Not to the room, not to Daniel, but almost to himself. Daniel shifted in his seat. What is going on? He asked again, this time more directly. His voice carried a hint of impatience. Confusion. Because this was not part of the plan. This was not something he could control. The doctor finally turned toward him. You said her name is Margaret Carter? He asked. Yes, Daniel replied. Why? There was a brief pause. Not hesitation. Just respect. Because whatever came next deserved to be said correctly. With all due respect, the doctor said, his tone calm but firm. This is not just your mother. The word landed differently this time. Not small, not reduced, but expanded. Daniel frowned slightly. I do not understand, he said. The doctor turned back to me, and for the first time since this began, there was something in his expression that had not been there before. Gratitude. Deep. Unmistakable. You may not remember me, he said gently. I studied his face again, carefully, looking past the years, past the time that had changed us both. And then, something shifted. A memory, faint at first, then clearer. A hospital room. A younger version of this man. Nervous. Determined. Standing at the edge of something he was not yet sure he could do. You were at St. Mary's, I said slowly. Not a question. A realization. His eyes lit slightly. Yes, he replied. There it was. The connection. Years ago. Before everything changed. Before I stepped away. Before I became just a housewife. The room remained silent as the two of us spoke. Because now, this was no longer a meeting. It was something else. Entirely. You trained under Dr. Reynolds? I continued. He nodded. I did, he said. And you were the one who supervised my first major case. The words settled into the room. Clear. Definite. And suddenly, everything shifted. Daniel's posture changed. Not dramatically, but enough. His shoulders stiffened. His attention sharpened. What are you talking about? He asked. The doctor turned toward him again. This woman, he said carefully, was one of the most respected surgical consultants in that department. The sentence hung in the air. Heavy. Unavoidable. Daniel blinked. Once. Then again. That is not possible, he said quickly. Not out of denial, but because it did not fit the version of reality he had been living in. I did not respond. Because I understood his reaction. Perfectly. He was not rejecting the truth. He was struggling to place it. Because he had never seen that part of me. Never needed to. And over time, it had disappeared from his understanding completely. I would not be sitting here today if it were not for her. The doctor continued. His voice was steady, but there was emotion behind it now. During my first year, I made a mistake. A serious one. And she was the one who stepped in, corrected it, and made sure no harm was done. He paused, then added, she did not take credit. She did not make it public. She simply did what needed to be done. The room was completely still now. No one spoke. No one moved. Because the weight of what was being said was settling in. Daniel looked at me. Really looked. As if seeing me for the first time. You never told me that, he said. His voice was quieter now. Less certain. I met his gaze. I did not think it mattered, I replied. And that was the truth. Because at the time, my life had already shifted. My priorities had changed. My focus had moved from a hospital to a home. From a career to a child. I had not seen it as loss. Only as choice. I left that work years ago, I continued. When things changed at home. I did not need to explain further. The meaning was clear. The sacrifice was understood, even if it had never been spoken before. Daniel's expression shifted again. Something deeper this time. Something closer to realization. You mean you gave that up? He asked. I nodded slightly. Yes. There was no regret in my voice. No bitterness. Because I had never viewed it that way. Not then. Not now. But that did not mean it had no value. The doctor leaned back slightly, still watching me with quiet respect. You were never just anything, he said. The words were simple, but they carried everything. And for the first time since this all began, the room saw it. Not the label, not the role, but the truth behind it. Daniel said nothing. Because there was nothing immediate to say. The version of me he had known had just been expanded, rewritten, and it would take time for him to understand it. I sat there calm, steady, not needing to prove anything further. Because this moment was not about changing the past. It was about revealing it. And once something is revealed clearly, it cannot be unseen. No one returned to the original discussion. Not immediately. The documents on the table remained untouched. The plans, the timelines, the details that had seemed so important just moments ago had lost their place. Because something else had taken over the room. Something no one had expected. Daniel sat very still. His hands rested on the table, but they were no longer moving. His posture, once confident and controlled, had shifted into something quieter, less certain. He was looking at me, but not in the way he had before. Not as someone familiar, not as someone predictable, but as if he was trying to understand something he had never taken the time to see. You were a surgical consultant? He asked finally. His voice was steady, but it carried something new. Disbelief. I nodded. For a number of years, I replied. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes still fixed on me. And you never told me? He asked. The question was simple, but it held more than curiosity. It held confusion, a need to fill in something that had suddenly become missing. I did not think it was necessary, I said. He frowned slightly. How is that not necessary? He asked. I considered that. Carefully. Because the answer mattered. Because when you were growing up, I said, what mattered was you. The room remained quiet. No one interrupted. No one shifted. Because the conversation had moved beyond anything professional. It had become personal. I had a choice to make. I continued. Continue that path, or be present for yours. Daniel looked down for a moment. His fingers moved slightly now, tracing the edge of the table. And you chose me, he said. It was not a question, just realization. Yes, I replied. There was no hesitation, no explanation needed, just truth. He exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to carry more weight than the ones before it. I did not know that, he said quietly. I watched him, not with expectation, not with judgment, just awareness. Because this was not the moment for reaction. This was the moment for understanding. You were not meant to, I said. That caught his attention. He looked up again. What does that mean? He asked. It means, I said, that I did not give up something and then expect you to carry the weight of it. The words were calm, but they settled deeply. I made that choice, I added. Not you. Daniel's expression shifted again. This time, there was something heavier in it. Something closer to guilt. But I still should have known, he said. I shook my head slightly. Knowing is not the same as seeing, I replied. He paused, processing, trying to understand the difference. And I could see it happening. Slowly, carefully, like someone adjusting to a new perspective that does not quite fit yet, but cannot be ignored. The doctor, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke again. She was known for her precision, he said, and for the way she handled pressure. Daniel glanced toward him. And now, he asked. The doctor did not hesitate. The same, he replied. That answer did not surprise me, but it landed with Daniel. Because now, the past and the present were no longer separate. They were connected, and that connection changed everything. Daniel turned back to me. I have been, he began, then stopped. The words did not come easily, because this was not a conversation he was used to having. I have been treating you like, he tried again. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. We both knew how it would end. I did not interrupt. I did not help him find the words, because this was something he needed to reach on his own. After a moment, he looked down again. Like you were just there, he said quietly. There. The word was simple, but it carried everything. Presence without recognition. Support without acknowledgement. Existence without value. I nodded slightly. Yes, I said. Not as an accusation, but as confirmation. The room remained still. Because now, the truth was fully present. Not hidden. Not softened. Just clear. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His hands came together, fingers interlaced, as if trying to hold on to something. I did not mean to do that, he said. I know, I replied. And I did. Because intention is not always what defines impact. I thought I understood everything about our life, he continued. But I was only seeing part of it. That was closer. Closer to the truth. We all do that, I said. Because it was not just him. It was human nature. To see what is in front of us. And forget to ask what came before. He let out a small breath. Then looked at me again. This time, there was no confusion. No dismissal. Just awareness. And something else. Respect. Not loud. Not dramatic. But present. And that was new. I sat there quietly, letting the moment settle. Because this was not about changing everything in an instant. It was about opening something that had been closed for a long time. And once it opens, it does not close the same way again. The meeting, in its original form, did not continue. It ended shortly after. Not abruptly, but naturally. Because everyone in that room understood that something more important had just taken place. As we stood to leave, Daniel did not walk ahead of me this time. He waited. Just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But enough for me. We walked out of the room together. Side by side. Not separated. Not distant. Just present. And sometimes, that is where change begins. We did not speak right away. Not when we left the room. Not as we walked down the hallway. And not when we reached the elevator. Daniel stood beside me, his posture different now. Less rushed. Less certain. As if something inside him was still trying to settle into place. The elevator doors opened with a soft sound. We stepped inside. Just the two of us. The doors closed. And for a moment, everything was still. No voices. No movement. Just the quiet hum of the elevator descending. Daniel looked straight ahead at first. Then, slowly, he turned toward me. Mom, he said. It was the same word he had used countless times before. But this time, it felt different. Not automatic. Not casual. Intentional. Yes. I replied. He hesitated. Not because he did not know what to say, but because he did. And saying it meant facing it. I should not have said that, he said finally. The words were simple, but they carried weight. I looked at him. Calm. Waiting. You know, yesterday, he added. In the conference room. I nodded slightly. I know what you are referring to. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. I did not think about it, he said. I just said it. That was honest. And honesty mattered more than perfection. Yes, I replied. You did. There was no anger in my voice. No edge. Just truth. The elevator continued its descent. Floor by floor. Second. First, ground. But neither of us moved when the doors opened. Not immediately. Because the conversation was not finished. I did not mean it the way it sounded, he said. I considered that. Then asked quietly, how did you mean it? He paused, searching, trying to find words that matched something he had never needed to define before. I meant, he began, then stopped. His shoulders dropped slightly. I do not know how I meant it, he admitted. That was closer. Closer to something real. Then let me tell you how it sounded, I said. He looked at me, focused, listening. It sounded like everything I have been could be reduced to one word. I continued. I spoke slowly, not to emphasize, but to make sure each part was understood. It sounded like the years did not matter, I said. The choices did not matter. The life I built did not matter. The words were quiet, but they filled the space. Daniel did not interrupt. He did not defend himself. He simply stood there, listening. And that was important. Because for the first time, he was not trying to explain. He was trying to understand. The elevator doors began to close again. Someone pressed a button outside, stopping them. We stepped out into the lobby. The movement returned. People walking. Voices echoing. Life continuing around us. But the conversation remained between us. Unbroken. I did not see it that way, he said. I know, I replied. And that was the truth. Because if he had seen it, he would not have said it. That is the problem, I added gently. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I mean, you stopped seeing me fully, I said. He looked down for a moment, then back up. I never thought about it, he said. Yes, I replied. That is what happens over time. Not as an accusation, but as an observation. Because this was not about one moment. It was about many. Small, quiet, accumulated. I thought I understood everything, he said again. I know, I replied. We walked slowly toward the exit. This time he matched my pace. Not intentionally, not dramatically, but naturally. And that was different. I did not realize how much I left out, he said. His voice was quieter now, more grounded. I nodded slightly. We all leave things out, I said. Especially the things that do not ask to be seen. That part mattered. Because I had never asked for recognition. Never demanded it. Never needed to prove anything. But that did not mean it had no value. We reached the doors and stepped outside. The air was cool again. Fresh. Grounding. Daniel stopped near the car. He did not unlock it right away. Instead, he turned toward me fully. I want to understand, he said. The words were direct. Clear. Different from before. I looked at him. Studied his face. Not the version I remembered. Not the version from the past. But the one standing in front of me now. And I saw it. Not certainty. Not control. But willingness. A shift. Small. But real. Understanding takes time, I said. I have time, he replied. That was new. Because time had always been something he did not have. Or did not think he had. I nodded. Then we can begin there. He exhaled slowly. As if something inside him had been waiting for that answer. We stood there for a moment. Not speaking. But not distant either. Just present. Because the hardest part had already happened. The moment of recognition. The moment of truth. Everything after that was about what we chose to do with it. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were choosing. Together. The change did not happen all at once. There was no dramatic moment. No sudden shift that turned everything around overnight. Instead, it began quietly. With something small. That afternoon, when we got back home, Daniel did not go straight to his office. That was the first difference. He usually did. Without thinking. Without hesitation. But this time he paused. Right there in the living room. As if he was deciding something. Do you want some tea? He asked. The question caught me off guard. Not because it was unusual, but because of the way he asked it. Not distracted. Not rushed. Present. I looked at him. Yes, I said. That would be nice. He nodded and walked toward the kitchen. I remained where I was for a moment, listening to the sound of him moving around. Opening cabinets. Filling the kettle. Waiting. It was such a simple thing. Something I had done for him countless times. Without being asked. Without being noticed. And now he was doing it. Not perfectly. Not naturally yet. But intentionally. He returned a few minutes later, placing the cup in front of me. Here, he said. Thank you, I replied. He did not leave right away. Instead, he sat down across from me. That was the second difference. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Not because we did not have anything to say, but because we were not used to this kind of silence anymore. The kind that was shared, not avoided. I have been thinking about what you said, he began. I nodded slightly. And? I asked. He leaned forward a little, resting his hands on his knees. I realized something, he said. I waited. I have been measuring things in a way that made sense to me, he continued. Results. Efficiency. Progress. I listened. Because this was how he understood the world. Clear. Structured. Defined. But that does not work for everything, he added. No, I said. It does not. He looked at me. Especially not for people, he said. That mattered. Not the words themselves, but the understanding behind them. Yes, I replied. That is true. He sat back slightly, absorbing that. Then he asked something I did not expect. What was it like, he said. I looked at him. What was what like? I asked. Before, he said. Your work. Your life back then. The question was simple, but it carried something new. Curiosity. Not obligation. Not politeness. Real interest. I considered it for a moment, then answered. It was demanding, I said. Long hours. Difficult decisions. Constant responsibility. He nodded slowly. And you gave that up, he said. Yes. Why, he asked. The question came quickly, directly, without hesitation. I met his eyes. Because I had something more important, I said. He held my gaze. You mean me? Yes. The word was quiet, but it held everything. He looked down for a moment. His expression shifted again. Not confusion this time. Not even guilt. Something deeper. Recognition. Of something he had never fully understood before. I do not think I ever asked you that, he said. No, I replied. You did not. There was no blame in my voice. Only truth. He nodded slightly. I should have, he said. Maybe, I answered. But you are asking now. That mattered more. Because understanding does not come from the past. It comes from what we are willing to see in the present. He exhaled slowly, then looked around the room. At the furniture, the walls, the small details that made up a home. I always thought this was just normal, he said. What do you mean? I asked. I mean things being taken care of, he replied. Food on the table. Everything in its place. Life running smoothly. I nodded. And now? I asked. He looked back at me. Now I realize it did not just happen, he said. No, it never just happens. There is always someone behind it. Someone choosing it. Every day, we sat there for a while longer. Talking. Not about big things. Not about past mistakes. But about small moments. Memories. Details. The kind of conversation that builds slowly, but lasts. That evening, something else changed. When it was time for dinner, Daniel did not eat quickly and leave. He stayed. At the table. With me. We ate together. Not in silence. Not in distraction. But in conversation. Simple. Natural. Real. And I noticed something else. He listened. Not just to respond, but to understand. That was new. Later, as I stood up to clear the table, he stopped me. I will do that, he said. I looked at him. You do not have to, I replied. I know, he said. And that was the difference. He was not doing it because he had to. He was doing it because he chose to. I sat back down, watched as he gathered the plates, carried them to the sink, turned on the water. It was not perfect, not efficient, but it was intentional. And intention changes everything. As the evening settled into quiet, I returned to my chair by the window. The same place, the same view, but everything felt different. Not because the past had changed, but because the present had. I could still hear Daniel moving in the kitchen. Slower now, more deliberate. And I realized something. Change does not always come in words. Sometimes it shows itself in small actions. Repeated, consistent, real. I leaned back slightly, letting the moment settle. Because this was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of something new. Something that had been missing for a long time. And was now finding its way back. That night, the house felt quieter than usual. Not empty. Not distant. Just still. The kind of stillness that comes when something important is about to be said. Daniel had finished cleaning the kitchen. The dishes were done. The lights were dimmed. And for once, there was no rush to move on to something else. I remained in the living room, sitting by the window as I often did. The same chair. The same view. But I knew this moment would not be like the others. I could hear his footsteps approaching. Slower than before. Measured. Intentional. He stopped just behind me. Mom, he said. I turned slightly. Yes. He hesitated. Then moved to sit across from me. Not beside. Not standing above. Across. Facing me. I think we need to talk, he said. I nodded. Yes, I replied. We do. There was a pause. not uncomfortable, but necessary. Because this was not a conversation you begin lightly. I keep thinking about what happened at the hospital, he said. His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it. Something unresolved. I know, I said. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together. I cannot get past it, he continued. The way I spoke about you. I watched him carefully, not reacting, not interrupting, just listening. Because this was not about what I would say. Not yet. This was about what he needed to face. I said you were just a housewife, he said. The words sounded different now. Not casual, not careless, heavy. I keep replaying it, he added, trying to understand why I said it that way. I waited, and after a moment, I answered. Do you want to know why? I asked. He looked up. Yes, he said. Because that is how you see me, I replied. The words were quiet, but direct. They did not accuse. They did not attack. They simply revealed. He shook his head slightly. No, he said quickly. That is not how I see you. I held his gaze. Then why did it come so easily? I asked. He paused. Because that question did not have an easy answer. I do not know, he admitted. That was honest. And honesty mattered. You said it without thinking. I continued. That means it did not need to be thought about. The room remained still. Because the truth, when spoken clearly, does not need to be raised. It settles on its own. I never meant to reduce you, he said. I know, I replied. And that is what makes it harder. He frowned slightly. Why? Because it means it was not a mistake, I said. It was a habit. The word stayed between us. Habit. Something repeated. Something built over time. Something that becomes natural without being noticed. Daniel leaned back slightly, absorbing that. I did not realize I was doing that, he said. I know, I replied again. And I did. Because if he had realized it, we would not be here. There was a long pause. Then I spoke again. Do you know what that word meant to me? I asked. He looked at me, waiting. It meant that everything I had done could be summarized in a way that made it sound small, I said. My voice remained calm, steady, controlled, but every word carried weight. It meant the years did not matter, I continued. The choices did not matter. The things I gave up did not matter. He swallowed slightly. I could see it. The impact, not as a reaction, but as understanding. I did not see it that way, he said. I know, I replied. Then I leaned forward slightly. Not aggressively, not emotionally, but deliberately. That is the problem, I said. He held my gaze. And in that moment, I said the one thing that had been building since the beginning. You measured me in a word, I said. I measured my life in the years I gave you. The room fell, completely still, because some sentences do not need explanation. They carry everything on their own. Daniel did not speak. Not immediately, because he could not. His expression shifted slowly, from confusion to realization, to something deeper, something heavier. I never thought of it that way, he said quietly. No, I replied. You did not. There was no anger in my voice. Only truth. Because this was not about making him feel guilty. It was about making him see clearly. I am not asking you to feel bad, I continued. I am asking you to understand. He nodded slowly. I am trying, he said. I can see that, I replied. And I meant it. Because he was here. Sitting. Listening. Not defending. Not avoiding. That mattered. I cannot change the past, he said. No, I agreed. But you can change how you see it. He took a slow breath. Then another. As if something inside him was shifting into place. I do not want to see you that way anymore, he said. I considered that. Then nodded. Then do not, I replied. Simple. Clear. Because change does not come from intention alone. It comes from awareness and choice. We sat there for a moment longer, not speaking, but not distant either, because something had been said, fully, clearly, and once something is said like that, it does not need to be repeated. It stays, and begins to change everything around it. The conversation did not end with words. Not really, because some conversations, they do not conclude. They continue in what comes after. That night, we both went to our rooms without saying much more. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because what had been said needed space, needed time, and most of all, needed to become something more than just words. The next morning, I woke up early, as I always did. The house was quiet, the soft light of dawn stretching gently across the floor. I moved through my usual routine. Slow, steady, familiar, but there was something different in the air. Not tension, not distance, just awareness. I walked into the kitchen and began preparing breakfast. Simple. Nothing elaborate. Just something warm to start the day. As I reached for the kettle, I heard footsteps behind me. Daniel. Earlier than usual. I turned slightly. Good morning, I said. Good morning, he replied. His voice was calm, present, not distracted. That was the first thing I noticed. He stepped closer, then paused, as if considering something. Then he spoke. Can I help? He asked. I looked at him. For a moment, I did not answer. Not because I was unsure, but because I was observing. The way he stood, the way he waited. There was no impatience, no expectation, just willingness. Yes, I said finally. You can set the table. He nodded and moved to the cabinet, taking out the plates carefully. Not quickly, not automatically, but intentionally. I continued preparing the food while he worked beside me. And for the first time in a long time, we shared the space. Not separately, not in parallel. Together. The silence between us was different now. Not empty, not avoided, just natural. After a few minutes, he spoke again. I was thinking about something you said last night, he said. I nodded slightly. Which part? All of it, he replied. Then he added, but especially what you gave up. I placed the pan down and turned to face him. What about it? I asked. He hesitated, then spoke more slowly. I never thought of it as something you gave up, he said. I thought it was just your role. I listened, because this was important. I thought that was just who you were, he continued. And now? I asked. He looked at me. Now I realize it was a choice, he said. Yes, that was the difference. A role can feel fixed. A choice carries weight. It was, I replied. He nodded slowly. And I never acknowledged it, he said. There was no defense in his voice. No attempt to soften it. Just acceptance. That is true, I said. Not to hurt him, but to keep the truth clear. He exhaled quietly. I want to change that, he said. The words were simple, but this time, they were followed by something else. Action. I spoke to someone this morning, he added. I raised my eyebrows slightly. About what? He stepped closer to the table, placing the last plate down. About your old hospital, he said. St. Mary's. I paused, not out of shock, but out of curiosity. And I asked. They still have records, he said. People who remember you. That did not surprise me. Places like that, they do not forget entirely. They asked if you would be open to visiting, he continued. Not to work. Just to reconnect. I studied his face. Carefully. Why? I asked. He met my gaze. Because I think you deserve to be seen there again, he said. The words settled deeply. Not because of what they meant on the surface, but because of what they revealed. He was not trying to fix the past. He was trying to acknowledge it. I am not asking you to go, he added quickly. I just wanted you to know the option is there. That mattered, because it was not pressure. It was respect. I considered it for a moment, then nodded slightly. I will think about it, I said. He smiled. Not broadly, not dramatically, but genuinely. That is all I was hoping for, he replied. We sat down to eat, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were not just sharing a meal. We were sharing something else. Understanding. Not complete. Not perfect, but growing. After breakfast, Daniel did something else that surprised me. He did not leave immediately for work. Instead, he stayed. I moved my meetings to later, he said. Why? I asked. He shrugged slightly. I wanted to be here, he replied. That answer was simple, but it carried everything. Because for so long, time had been something he gave to everything else. Work, schedules, responsibilities. And now, he was choosing to give some of it here. With me. We spent the rest of the morning talking. Not about big things. Not about mistakes. But about life. Memories. Small details that had once been part of our daily routine. And as I listened, I realized something. Change does not come from one moment. It comes from many. Small. Consistent. Intentional. And this was one of them. I sat back in my chair, watching him as he spoke. Not the boy I had raised. Not the man I had misunderstood. But someone in between. Learning. Adjusting. Growing. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel invisible. I felt seen. A few days later, I went back to St. Mary's. Not because I had to. Not because anyone expected me to. But because I chose to. Daniel drove me there that morning. The same city. The same roads. But this time, everything felt different. Not unfamiliar. Just remembered. He parked the car and turned toward me. You do not have to stay long, he said. We can leave whenever you want. I nodded. I know. That mattered. Because for the first time, I was not being brought somewhere. I was choosing to go. We walked toward the entrance together. The doors opened, and the moment I stepped inside, something shifted. Not around me, inside me. The smell, the sound, the quiet rhythm of movement. It was all still there. Not exactly the same, but close enough. Close enough to remind me of who I had been. We walked down the hallway slowly. This time, Daniel did not walk ahead. He stayed beside me, matching my pace. Not out of obligation, but out of awareness. That was new. A nurse passed by, then paused, looked at me again. "Margaret?" she asked. Her voice held surprise. Recognition. I smiled slightly. "Yes," I replied. Her expression changed instantly. "I cannot believe it," she said. "It has been years." "It has," I said. And just like that, something that had once felt distant was real again. Word spread quickly, not loudly, but naturally. People remembered. Not all of them, but enough. Faces I had not seen in years. Voices that carried familiarity. Small conversations. Short exchanges. But each one added something back. Not status. Not importance. But recognition. And that was enough. Daniel stood quietly beside me through all of it. Not interrupting. Not explaining. Just observing. Watching a part of my life he had never seen before. At one point, the same doctor from the meeting approached us again. "I am glad you came back," he said. "So am I," I replied. He glanced at Daniel, then back at me. "You were missed," he added. I nodded. "Thank you." Not because I needed the words, but because I understood them. And for the first time in a long time, they felt received. After a while, we found a quiet place to sit. A bench near a window. The same kind of place I had once used to pause between long hours. I looked out at the courtyard, the trees, the light, and I let the moment settle. Daniel sat beside me, quiet, thoughtful. "I understand now," he said. I turned slightly. "What do you understand?" He took a breath. "That you were never just anything," he replied. The words were simple, but they carried everything. I studied his face, not to test him, not to question him, but to see if he truly meant it. And I could tell. He did. "It was easier for me to see you one way," he continued, "because it fit into my world." I listened. "But that does not mean it was true," he added. "No, it did not. And I should have looked closer," he said. "Yes," I replied gently. "But you are looking now." That mattered more. Because understanding does not come from what we missed. It comes from what we choose to see moving forward. We sat there for a moment longer. Not speaking. Just present. And in that silence, there was no distance. No misunderstanding. No need to explain. Only clarity. After we left the hospital, we returned home. The same house. The same space. But something had changed. Not in the walls. Not in the furniture. But in how we moved within it. That evening, as I sat by the window once more, I thought about everything that had happened. The words. The moment. The recognition. The change. And I realized something. I had not come back to the hospital to prove anything. Not to Daniel. Not to anyone else. I had come back. To remember. To reconnect with something that had always been there. Even when it was not seen. Even when it was not named. Even when it was reduced to a single word. I reached for the small notebook on the table beside me. Opened it. Turned to a blank page. And I wrote one word. Worth. I looked at it for a long moment. Then added another line beneath it. Not defined by titles. Not measured by roles. Not reduced by words. Just lived. I closed the notebook gently. Not because I was done, but because I no longer needed to write it down to understand it. Daniel stepped into the room quietly. He did not interrupt. He did not ask anything. He simply stood there for a moment. Then said, "Mom?" I turned. "Yes." He hesitated. Then smiled slightly. "I am glad I see you now," he said. I looked at him. Calm. Steady. And for the first time in a long time. Completely certain. "I have always been here," I replied. He nodded. "I know." And that was enough. Because some things do not need to be said again. They just need to be understood. I turned back toward the window. The evening light stretched across the floor, warm and quiet. The world outside continued as it always had. Unchanged. But I was not the same person watching it anymore. Because I no longer wondered what I was worth. I no longer needed it to be explained. Or recognized. Or proven. Because I knew. And that was something no one could ever reduce again.